And I think it's almost irresponsible not to have a small part of your savings or your portfolio in Bitcoin, because it's proving to be a good way to get ahead, and while the correlation to tech stocks and other things kind of comes and goes, we know that it's basically just a store of value savings tool that will continue to increase in value because of its limited supply and its deflationary monetary policy, that over time it will be worth more. There's no real risk there that I can see.
Hello, I am Codyellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Jason Crowe, a business leader who has worked with iconic New Zealand product brands such as phil&teds, Garage Project and Goodnature. We discuss Jason's time working in the banking world and his decision to leave it, as well as how he has come to understand Bitcoin and how it impacts business and finance. Finally, we talk about the proof of work of sports and how athletes and sports teams may be able to incorporate Bitcoin thinking into the way they fund and organise themselves, and our new search to find New Zealand's top Bitcoin sportsperson. If you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show.
A couple of weeks ago, we did that the Future of Bitcoin in New Zealand talk with Kiwi Paul. I mean, how did you think that went, Jason?
Yeah, it was good. Like I said to you, it was the first time that I kind of spoke publicly about Bitcoin. So, I guess I always feel, as I've said to you before as well, I'm just a guy who's done some reading and have an interest in this. So whenever someone says, do you want to talk about this stuff publicly? I think, well, I don't have that much to say. So, but it was good. I guess the more I read, the more I learn, the more I understand, I guess you start to realize you do know a bit about a subject. And it was interesting to be able to talk about, I guess, my views on the space anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think it's easy to underestimate exactly how much we are over this topic and how much we are really aware of some of the bigger issues, not just Bitcoin in particular, but macroeconomics, monetary policy.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, any Bitcoiner could probably do a better job than most central bankers is.
Yeah, and it's funny because, that was my background, right? So, I was the guy who was having to pick what Reserve Bank governors were going to do. So my first job when I was trading for National Bank, and then ANZ took us over. My job was trading interest rates from cash rate out to 1 year. So the short end of the interest rate curve, I had to know inside out, and I had to know what was going to happen to the cash rate, because that impacted 90-day bills and 6-month rates and 1-year rates. So, and not just New Zealand. If at the time I think it was Alan Greenspan was the Reserve Bank governor, or the Fed governor in the US, I had to know what he was thinking and what the European Central Bank governor was thinking. So, I'd read their meeting minutes, and I'd see what colour tie they were, wearing before they went in, and all that kind of stuff. That you hear about now. That was my job for like 5 years. Yeah. So, and at the time, I deeply understood how monetary policy impacted interest rates, and that's how I made money or lost money for the bank and the customers, and also how that impacted the economy. But you never really think that layer below that is all this money you're trading, all these, millions, some days I'd be doing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, what's actually the money? I understand what an interest rate is, but I never really thought deeply about, what is money.
I'm curious, two parts of that, Jason. Firstly, how did you find yourself in that world? What sort of led you, as much as you can share, to get into that world of banking, and then what made you get out of it?
Yeah, two good questions. Short answer why I got into it was exciting, and it was very, very competitive. And I came from a competitive sporting background. I used to run race track and field, and then triathlon internationally or nationally, and then. Actually, my claim to fame was I got second in my age group at the Japanese National Triathlon Champs.
Oh, really?
My first race when I was living in Japan.
Oh, wow.
But prior to that, I kind of ran middle distance, 1,500 metres, 5,000 metres on the track. To a decent standard. I was kind of, fourth or fifth in the country as a junior. And never really made it beyond that, and never got to the point where I could make a career or go to the Commonwealth Games or anything. But I was hyper competitive, and I guess I still am. So that space of trading, when you're trading, it's you against the other traders. If you won on a trade, the other trader by default has to have lost. If you take a long position, they take a short position, you get it right, you win. They get it right, you lose. So I found that really exciting.
Yeah.
And you're sitting in this dealing room of 100 dealers, and you've got 3 TV screens and your Bloomberg and telephones, and it was a lot of fun.
Do you think there was a certain cultural kind of vibe? I'm not sure if you want to share what era this was, but you mentioned the national bank. So, I mean, in my mind, it's a certain period of time when you had this kind of, I hate to say it, but almost sexiness to that boiler room kind of make money quick. Especially after deregulation and the floating of the dollar. I don't think it was that long ago for you, but
yeah, no, absolutely. So this was probably 99 or 2000 until about 2007. I was at the bank. So
golden era.
I mean, it was markets were pumping, the bank was big, the dealing room was full. Things have changed a lot even since then. My understanding is the dealing room's got a lot smaller. A lot of people have got their own systems they use. They don't need the banks. But at the time, it was still that era, and I was probably still of that mindset where, for me, it was about making lots of money. For myself, I was getting paid very well, big bonuses like there is in banking, that kind of banking. When I say I work for a bank, people think you're in the branch. Yeah. So it's hard to explain money markets to people who haven't done that before. But yeah, absolutely, it was a very dog-eat-dog and alpha male kind of environment. And to a certain extent, I enjoyed that. I was in my mid to late 20s, I was having fun. But then you asked why I left it. We just had our first child, and you start to think about life a bit differently. I've always had a bit of a creative bent as well, and I developed this product, a bike rack, that I wanted to develop, and was working with some industrial designers, and then looking for a factory to manufacture it, and eventually got it to market. It was quite a fun project, but through that process I met the founder of the owner of phil&teds, the baby goods company in Wellington, quite a famous New Zealand brand, and I wanted the foam rubber that was on the handle of my buggy for my bike rack. So I went and spoke to him, and next thing we're talking about his business, which I found really exciting, a business that actually made a real thing for a real customer and filled a real need for somebody and made their life better, and so I thought, that sounds really exciting. I'd like to get out of this kind of dog eat dog world and actually make a real thing for real people. So I pitched myself that I could come and work for him, and he believed me, and allowed me to invest in the business as well, which was great. And we had a fun run there of actually building a real business around the world, which took me and the family to Colorado for 5 years, where I set up phil&teds for the US. But it was that change of having a child and thinking it's not just about making lots of money, and it's quite a vacuous environment. And I looked around the room of a whole lot of grumpy traders in their 50s thinking, I don't want to be that guy. That's
interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I'm very interested. I think things, from my perspective, have become a lot more algorithmic. I imagine there was still possibly a degree of human intervention when you were there, but I every now and then I watch these YouTube videos, and it really seems like it's just you're kind of just tending to the beast, and you almost have to hyper-focus on it at the expense of all else. And, when you look at what it takes to be a balanced human, you're sort of moving too far in one direction at the expense of all else, and the sacrifices you make to be up for the pre-market opens, and to be available at the different time zones, and all of these things which are probably quite incompatible with having a young child.
It was. I remember once I was working the night desk, so it means you start at 10 o'clock and you work through till 2 in the morning on your own in the dealing room, looking after the bond book for international customers. And then you come home at 2 and go to bed, and you have all the printouts of where the 10-year US Treasury is, and the gilt 10-year and everything, and where the currency is. And you go to sleep, and then you just have your phone beside the bed, and then some trader in New York calls you and he wants a price on a 10-year government New Zealand bond at 4 in the morning, and you got to wake up and look at your sheet of paper.
So just going back a little bit, so you mentioned two things. First was living in Japan, and secondly, you're talking about your sports career with the triathlon stuff and that. So I'm curious to just dive into those a little bit, because there certainly seems to be a degree of sort of proof of work with this hyper-competitive triathlete kind of thing. And I find that very interesting. So tell me a bit more about that sports side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I got into, running when I was maybe 13, 14, just, started getting serious about it, and then that became my sport. I got too small to play rugby. I started getting kind of broken when I was trying to play second 15 rugby, and I was a skinny runner. So I gave everything away just to run, and I loved it. I tried giving up my job for a year and going on the dole and pretending I was looking for a job, and tried to kind of, break into like a New Zealand team. So, it was a big thing for me. And I ran a lot. I'd be running 160 to 200 kilometers a week in training. So I often got injured, and in the end, all the injuries just got to me, and I decided that maybe I should try something else. And I was actually living in Japan, and I was in the pool swimming because I had another injury, and met a Japanese guy, and we started talking, and he got me into triathlon. And so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and what part of Japan were you living in?
So I lived in Ibaraki-ken in Tsukuba for the first year or so, and then came back to New Zealand, had another stint for about a year and a half, 2 years in Saitama-ken, a little town called Kumagaya.
Yeah.
On the Kumagaya line.
I know Kumagaya.
Yeah. So, it was great. It was actually a couple of stops past Kumagaya, but that was kind of our main centre. Yeah. Just running, doing triathlon, teaching Japanese or teaching English, studying Japanese. Studied Japanese through high school and university. So the natural thing to do after I had some money was to go and live in Japan. And then I spent the last maybe 6 months full-time in language school, just trying to really get my Japanese good. I got up to passing level 2 of the Japanese proficiency exam, but never got level 1.
JLPT. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. No, it's certainly a challenging language to learn, but it sounds really really exciting, and it would have been a blast. Just
it was great. I mean, again, Japan in those days, it was very different to what it is now, and there's obviously things going on in their economy which you'd be aware of. Because of the things that we kind of study these days, but at the time it was booming, it was fun, it was safe, it was exciting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I must admit there was an era which, I mean, I wasn't there for that, but still, having just come back, I'm back in Wellington, and I mean, Japan still, I mean, I must say it's damn sight better than New Zealand, even if the yen is dying. I sort of came back to Wellington just last night, flew in just from Hawke's Bay, and I don't know, it was a beautiful day today, as you know, but I don't know, I'm still processing a lot of my thoughts, it's a bit emotional. I really do love this city. I would say this is my favourite place in New Zealand. Yeah. But it's sort of, what has happened, why is it just so hard to do business, to build things, to get a bit of energy, and I mean, I think, you and I are probably similar. We look at the root causes, we look at some of the monetary side, etc., though a lot of fingers are being pointed at the political side, and I don't know how productive that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's been obviously some events today, even in the US, which you'll be aware of, which is pretty crazy. But, for me, politics is just becoming so partisan all over the world, particularly the US. But in New Zealand, again, I think about now, I'm old enough that I've lived through, I voted Labour, I voted National, I voted Greens over the years. I tend to vote for who I think might actually do better. I'm not, a dyed in the blue National supporter or anything like that, but I tend to be more, perhaps, I guess, right of centre in terms of my, economic thinking around the world. I think you're better to help people grow things than to give people money handouts, So we've got to find a way. We have one of the worst levels of productivity in the OECD in New Zealand. So I'm thinking, what can we do to make it better? But I'm thinking, well, over all the last 30 years of all the different governments I've voted for, nothing's actually got much better. Yeah. And that's, I come back to, and it's a bit of cliche, but, fix the money first. If we're working on this with this fiat currency, and you have to remember that the currency's only, this fiat system's only been around for 50 or so years, and before that there was kind of a semi-gold standard for 50 years, and that broke, and before that there was a system that broke. So this idea that this is the money we have and will always be, I think a lot of people, just that recency bias, everyone thinks that. Yeah. But I'm a strong believer that we're going to move past this fiat currency, and obviously I've got a view on how Bitcoin might fit into that.
Yeah.
But,
well, it's interesting because, I mean, everyone talks about 1971, the gold standard, etc. But more recently and closer to home, I mean, you had the floating of the dollar, and I'm not exactly sure, was that the 80s?
I think that was like 87 or
87,
something.
yeah. I mean, I can only study it historically, but what New Zealand once was as a socialist country, effectively, you know, where the government did everything, this post-war consensus. And I find it very interesting. There's a really good documentary on the Labour, fourth Labour government, I believe it was, the Longy government, and just the Rogernomics and that whole period. And spending time with my family and talking to, you know, older family members about the old days, you know, the power board, the NZ Dairy Board, you know, everything was very monopolistic, governmental. And now New Zealand is this, like, I mean, effectively deregulated market in many places. Yet we still have this cultural desire, this kind of nanny state kind of echo resounding. And, you know, you only go through, you know, Central Hawke's Bay or, you know, rural New Zealand, which I think in a way is that even though a lot of people are city people these days, I think rural New Zealand still holds a you know, a myth building kind of role in the country. And it's the same stuff, you know, just old, tired towns. You know, these kind of things that just feel like they're from the 80s and nothing's really changed. And I find that just really interesting and curious. It's almost nostalgic.
Yeah, it is. But, you know, it's interesting. It's not that different most places you go. You know, we spent 5 years as a family living in the States as well, from about 2008, 2012, 13. And, you know, I love those old, kind of a tangent here, but I grew up on shows like Hill Street Blues and that kind of thing, and those 80s TV shows. I love that style of 80s cars, you know, the big square kind of, they call them Lux barges. Yeah. And so my thing when I went to the States, I wanted to buy like an 80s car.
Like a Detroit car.
Yeah. Yeah. So I found one in Michigan, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities. Anyway, so it's about, you know, 1,000 miles from where I was living. So I basically flew up there, met the lady, bought the car for like $1,500. It was just beautiful, you know, just and drove it back. Yeah. But, you know, driving back across the States, you know, just like you say, these tiny towns, a lot of the shops are boarded up. There's nothing going on. And, you know, it's pretty similar in most places you go around the world. You see the same stories in Italy where you can buy a house for €1 if you move into the country. You know, there's like 9 million empty houses in Japan at the moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I wonder if there's a connection here because I was just, you know, watching a documentary on actually the life of Stalin, which was very interesting. And there's this kind of long history when we look at communist movements. It always comes from the city. And there's this kind of myth that somehow it's about the you know, the farmers and the proletarians and that sort of thing. But actually, a lot of the ideology comes from the intelligentsia, and it comes from the cities and the universities. And there was this thing during the 1930s where they went out and actually actively persecuted the farmers. You know, no questions asked, because they were sort of making this myth up that the farmers were hoarding all of the grain. And I mean, it was a very tumultuous time in history. But I thought that was really fascinating because we're seeing similar things globally right now. Just the kind of the vignette of, you know, farmers being persecuted by regulation, you know, climate change policies, you know. And in New Zealand, you know, as you know, I work in this space, and it's actually very onerous to be a farmer. You know, there's so much regulation. Yeah. And yet, in a sense, that's kind of the basis, the foundation of wealth is agriculture. You know, it's the base layer. If you can't eat, nothing else matters. And I don't know. I find that interesting. I don't really have a thesis or a conclusion on that, but just that urban-rural divide.
Yeah, and you know, in theory, the latest national government in New Zealand, the idea is they want to get rid of all this burden, this regulation, and help grow things. And you know, I think last time around I voted Labour. This time I did vote National because I feel like, well, I think that's what we need at the moment. I feel like we are stalling, and I feel like it seems like there is this over-regulation. You know, the Resource Management Act seems like a nightmare. It's hard to get anything done. The stories in Wellington about, you know, developers, there's a big piece of land out in Johnsonville, they want to put up 100 houses, but it's just too much paperwork to actually get through the process of actually trying to do it. So, you know, I kind of agree with the idea of that, but I just wonder whether anything will actually happen. And this goes back to my thinking that I'm just not sure it matters who's in power, because we seem to be stuck in this cycle. You know, the Tories in the UK have just got kicked out after 14 years. I actually read an article this morning that said that the only thing they achieved was to stay in power.
Yeah.
They talked about, the Tories, traditionally should be small government, but government's got no smaller. They didn't unwind all the jobs that Blair created in the government. Taxes have gone up. The percentage of government spending of GDP has gone up. All these things you'd expect from a Labour government. The Tories have done that for 14 years, And I think the only reason they got kicked out is because people want change. Everyone wants change at the moment.
Yeah, it feels like that. And I wonder, there's almost this kind of reversal of common sense where things, you could call it clown world, sort of things don't make sense anymore. And it really, it's hard to even keep abreast of what is even happening. I don't watch the news. That's not something that I do anymore, because it's just impossible to parse what that even means. And as you say, the political solutions, I think those are done. I'm actually listening to the audiobook for The Sovereign Individual again.
It's funny, I'm halfway through reading it again at the moment as well. And
it's so prescient, just kind of in the first few chapters again, but looking at, the way these political systems eventually, kind of faltered, and there was this kind of pendulum of decentralization and centralization. And I look at my own situation, living in Japan now and back in New Zealand for the moment, and I think, man, if you were stuck here and you were working for the government, or you were locked into a house and the whole situation here, that's actually a very difficult place to be. But if you have the ability to decentralize and go and do other stuff, you have other currencies, you've got Bitcoin, you've got these kinds of things going, that feels like a much more successful strategy. And it's already proving itself, I think. But it's like people's reaction times are sort of not quite there. Maybe we've got to measure this in years, but it seems like more and more people are beginning to realize that something is not right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people realize that things aren't right. I talk to people who I know are quite negative on Bitcoin, and I guess I'd say I've never met anyone who has studied Bitcoin, understands Bitcoin, at least put in like 100 hours of work. You need a lot more than that to truly understand it, but let's say 100 hours, who says, oh my God, I've done 100 hours of study and this thing is useless. It's a piece of crap. It's going to zero, nothing backs it, right? Never. But there are thousands of people who say, oh yeah, that Bitcoin thing, that magic internet money, it's going nowhere. There's nothing backing it. It's too volatile. It's going to zero. Government's going to ban it. So yeah, it still surprises me. So anyway, I talk to people and they say, this is just crazy. Do you know what it costs now for this at the supermarket? And, my wife and I have good salaries and we can't seem to get ahead. And have you noticed how bad things are? And blah, blah, blah. And they go on and on. But they never make the connection, to what's causing it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like almost this Faustian proposition that we've been given the knowledge to know. We're sort of, we've laid it all on the line. We've taken the red pill, as they would say, or the orange pill. And it's sort of like, okay, now we know. And then you realize that there's a lot of people who don't know. And we sort of do our best. And I think it comes from a good place where we're trying to share this good stuff. But at the end of the day, people have to find it on their own. And
yeah, it's slow. It'll happen. It'll get there. I guess I'm encouraged by... I just think I've probably been involved now for about 5 years. First time I heard about it and started reading. And I think about the stories that were in the media then versus now. You've now got a presidential candidates. It's on the ticket in the US. For single issue voters, it could swing the election. You've got major banks with trading desks now with Bitcoin. You've got the ETFs in the US. You've got major pension funds in the US putting it in there. So it's a known accepted asset class now. People still say it's volatile and it's crazy and it's risky and it just trades like Nvidia stock. But again, it might at the moment, but that's not what Bitcoin is. It's actually probably the safest, most boring thing you can invest in. Yeah. But it's slowly getting there. But it's funny, I have this, actually got a t-shirt on at the moment. I have this t-shirt, it's kind of subtle, it doesn't like kind of scream Bitcoin, but it's got the logo on there, right?
Oh, nice.
And I wear it probably 4 or 5 times a week, everywhere I go, right? And probably in the last 3 years since I've been wearing it, I've had one person recognize it and say something.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm in a big major city in the Western world, and I've had one person, it was my doctor, my GP.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, are you hodling?
Oh man, yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, I'm still processing, Jason, quite a lot of the travels. It's been a whirlwind tour of Europe and Asia over the last few months, and processing that, and now coming back to New Zealand, and like just the last few days in Hawke's Bay, and kind of going to the new world. I went into the Woolworths as well, and I was shocked. I was honestly shocked. I don't know, you just sort of squint your eyes and you look at the prices and you think, man, there's nothing, there's no single thing for under $5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had a dinner, like a very cheap noodle dinner, and it was $25.
Yeah.
And I think, this is really quite tough, and people are just sort of trying their best. And I think the study of collapse is really interesting, not in a morbid sense, but I think the way humans are quite resilient. And it's not this kind of myth of, the kind of zombie apocalypse, where everyone's sort of hunkering down. The collapse, it manifests as things just get more and more shit. Mm. And people just they start, instead of doing milk, they do powdered milk. Instead of doing powdered milk, they just start not having milk, and they sort of slowly, until things are just so barren. And I mean, there's moments of maybe beauty and sort of laughter, and you can still have fun in that poverty, but without a meta awareness of what's going on, you're just sort of I'm reminded of the Proles in 1984, and not to be critical of people, but it's sort of like, they're enjoying their music and their football and their drinking as they're being exploited by this system that they just don't even understand, because they can't understand it. And I mean, I feel like it comes back to education, but
and eventually the word will spread, and they always say that people buy Bitcoin at the price they deserve, and I believe in that as well. I believe in proof of work, and the amount of it's not like you understand shares or bonds and you invest and you have your Kiwi saver, and then someone says, I've got a new share, a new company, you should look at this. You can understand the concept of a company and what equity is and what a share is, because you've had that before, and you can understand what the company produces or sells or service they offer, because that's something you're familiar with. But to say, here's this thing which you can't touch, which is created out of mining, which uses huge amounts of computer and electricity, and it's like, what? So it's going to take a long time. And I think people have to get to the point where they understand more deeply what's wrong with the money we're using before they, seek that next stage of knowledge.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I've been reading Eric Kayson's book, Crypto Sovereignty, which is a profound deep dive into. I guess it speaks to the kind of things that I'm really interested in, and it's written in a way that speaks to the kind of a lineage of the study of power, hegemony, these kinds of things. It's kind of an academic book, but looking at the way this project plays out, I wonder if it's folly to assume that we're going to have this kind of mass awakening. I don't know if I see that, and I wonder if the theme of decentralization kind of extends to actually decentralization of knowledge, and kind of people like us, we get it and we understand, and then there's people who just will never get it, and that's fine. We don't all have to kind of sort of lockstep move into a Bitcoin world, and maybe that's part of this changing turmoil where there's pockets of people who get it and pockets of people who don't, and then it's about kind of navigating the realities of that, because are they going to come after the Bitcoiners? Are they going to be clamping down on things in certain jurisdictions, and then people have to move around, and you've got to get that. Yeah,
it's interesting times. I feel really optimistic about the future. I feel like it's going to be probably a bit of a shit decade, but I guess if you think all these things kind of line up, like Ray Dalio's long-term debt cycle, and if you kind of looked at that
fourth turning type stuff,
and all those things, they're kind of all lining up, and that we're in a bit of a low point in a shit period. There's got to be some kind of deleveraging of the amount of debt we have in the world, or some kind of collapse, and there's got to be some new beginning, which I'm quite excited about, because my kids are at that age where they'll be living through that new beginning. But I feel like there's some things have to change, and it's going to be quite ugly for a period. And out of that, maybe some of these these global organisations that started out of the last fourth turning, if you believe that kind of cycle, like the World Bank and the IMF, and some of these organisations might crumble, and we might see a better way, and part of that might be a new basis to the financial system.
I was interested. So when I was in Prague, there was a group there doing resident visas for Paraguay, South America, and I found that was really interesting because it was like really cheap. It was maybe like 0.1 Bitcoin,
Right.
just no strings attached.
Yeah.
And I think you got a driver's license with it as well. Just pay to play.
Yeah.
And I know there is similar things in some of these sort of different island states where you can effectively pay to play. And to be fair, I mean, New Zealand is pay to play as well if you're rich enough to get residency and citizenship. But I find that interesting because that's kind of like this transition period between nation state, centralized authority, and kind of like, oh, look, we're just going to have a free market and buy it.
That was the most interesting thing for me out of the sovereign individual so far. Anyway, it's just this idea of going from the medieval and the the agrarian economy and the farmers through to then the church dominating and into the industrial revolution and this kind of centralization and more what do they call it, the the returns on violence got higher. So and now this idea where the nation state is potentially something which might not exist. I mean, it could be 50, it could be 100 years before that happens, but it seems natural to me that's the next thing. Just this whole idea, I just went to Australia with the family for school holidays, bit of a break, and, you're filling in your declaration as I don't have any more than $10,000 cash on me. I said, well, but I do have my seed phrase in my head. Does that count? No, I'm crossing a border with all this money in my head.
Yeah.
Just this idea of, and also I went to watch the European football on my Sky Sport app. It doesn't work in Australia because it's, this jurisdiction is different and the broadcasting rights. It's like we live in this global economy where you can buy anything from anywhere, but you have to use 170 different currencies to pay for it. And you can't do this over on this side, but you can do it over here. And I just feel like it's gonna move more towards that. As these jurisdictions will be in this area, here's what we do and here's how tax works, and you decide where you want to be, and that could be 50 years away, but I actually find that quite exciting. But by the same token, that kind of saddens me a little bit because I do feel like I'm a proud New Zealander, and I do feel like I like to say I'm from New Zealand, and I think about the positive things about New Zealand, and I think this is a good country. And I think, well, does that go? What does that mean? Are you part of more of an international group of people that you have the same interests and beliefs in? And how does that work,
Yeah, I'm deeply interested in that. I studied a lot of this kind of identity building. Talk about this sort of the sports culture, the nation state. The kind of how you build up a certain sense of identity. And coming back, just today I was trying to catch the train, but it was a bus, and the guy was just help me out because I didn't know where to go, and I felt like I was like simultaneously like a foreigner, but also deeply local. Yeah. And it was just so friendly. And everyone, especially in Wellington, people are just so nice.
Yeah.
You transit through Dubai airport or you go to Hong Kong or something, and man, no one's got time for anything. But, it's like, Wellington's like the only place in the world probably where you thank the driver of the bus, And there's a sort of stuff like that. But, where does that come from? Because I think the state would like to lay claim to that. And so, is there a way to delineate New Zealand from the New Zealand government? And I think that the New Zealand government and the New Zealand state tries to kind of hijack and take credit for the New Zealanders, who are these people on the island.
Yeah.
And so I think it sort of will probably play out like that if you're born on the islands, you're going to be a Kiwi. You're going to be in this thing with the nature and all of that stuff that we love. But whether I identify with the New Zealand government and whether I support sending money to fight Ukraine or Russia or whatever they're doing with my money, my taxpayer money, it's like, I don't opt into that. In fact, I would like to opt out of that. Is there a way to unsubscribe from this, please?
Yeah.
But Jason, I wanted to just change tact a little bit and come back to the sports stuff, because I don't know if this has really been talked about in the Bitcoin world, but at a high level, what sort of connections do you see between sports and Bitcoin? And are there connections there, and what could we learn from those two things?
Well, I guess the natural connection I think of is just, I guess what Peter McCormack is doing with his football team in the UK. I think that's pretty cool. For those not familiar, Rail Bedford. It's funny because that was actually our distributor when I was at Phil&Teds for the UK market was based in Bedford.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been to Bedford like half a dozen times. I stayed at the Swan Hotel where they always talk about when their guests come and they stay at the Swan. So it's a nice little English town down by the river. It's just funny now thinking that I've been there so many times. But I don't know. I guess Peter talks about this idea of a cheat code. and just this idea where you can get ahead, stand out, and build a following that's global that you can't do unless you are on a Bitcoin standard. You know, I mean, I've got a Real Bedford shirt. You know, I wear to the gym, and you know, people ask me what the football team is, and it's interesting. You know, my son's got one; he loves it. He's a Bitcoiner as well, and but you know, beyond that, I don't think it's a matter of whether it's sport or whether it's any other business. You know, there's this way where you can say, I'm going to accept Bitcoin, I'm going to pay people in Bitcoin, I'm going to try and be in a Bitcoin standard, and people who believe in what I believe in, then I'm the business for you. You know.
I wonder, for me, I look at it a lot from the creative side, and I think, okay, I've got this theory around self-patronage where instead of having someone pay you for work, you can kind of pay for yourself into the future with Bitcoin, and that's kind of starting to play out for me. But I wonder, when we're talking about athletes, and obviously there's different kinds of sports, you know, you've got team sports and individual pursuits and different things, but I wonder if there's something here where Bitcoin can help enable sports people. You know, you talk about triathlons and running. I mean, for a lot of people, they are amateurs in the sense that they're not getting paid to do this. And it's kind of really hard to break into the professional league in a lot of things. But in terms of amateur sports, people doing it part-time alongside work, could Bitcoin help enable people to just focus more on their craft?
Well, I think it can enable anybody to focus more just because you're getting ahead, right? If it continues on the trajectory that it has been on, then you know, every 4 years you're going to be quite a bit more wealthy than you were last time if you continue to hold. So, you know, for me, it's very difficult. You know, you put cash in the bank now on term deposit at 6%, right? And you know, inflation's running at 4%, and tax takes 2%. So you're not making anything, right? Yeah. So it staggers me. You get taxed on the interest on the term deposits. Like straight away, you lose all the benefit above the inflation rate. Anyway, so then people start moving out the curve. They say, well, I can't just put money in the bank, so I need to invest in stocks. And then they do other things. And then a house, like we do in New Zealand, you know. And, you know, incentives drive behaviour. So if there's no capital gains tax and, you know, property always goes up in New Zealand, which it tends to do, and it's a leveraged investment. You know, you can put down $200,000 and buy $1 million home. If it goes to 1.2 million, you've actually doubled your money because you only put in 200,000. So now you've got 400,000, right? So, you know, it's attractive. But I think people are just looking at ways to get ahead because it's so hard to get ahead. And I think it's almost irresponsible not to have a small part of your savings or your portfolio in Bitcoin, because it's proving to be a good way to get ahead, you know. And while the correlation to tech stocks and other things kind of comes and goes, you know, we know that it's basically just a store of value savings tool that will continue to increase in value because of its limited supply. And it's deflationary monetary policy that over time it will be worth more. There's no real risk there that I can see. It feels like the big ones are now gone. You know, potentially there's still a bug, but that seems highly unlikely. Governments are now getting on board with actually, you know, accepting it. It's become so big it's going to be hard to stop. It's so decentralized that if one country shuts it down, people move to another one. So it does feel there's a sense of inevitability that it's going to continue. And if it does, everybody should be holding a little bit just in case, right? Because if you think about the scale of the markets, you think, you know, there's something like $200 trillion of bonds out there, and there's another $150 trillion of equities, and there's $300 trillion of real estate. You know, all of those things, people are putting money there because they want to get ahead. In New Zealand in particular, we put it all into property because we want to get ahead. Once you go back, and this again could take 50 years, where the house is more of a utility object that you live in rather than your savings tool, then the values relative to what they are now will come down. And it's so illiquid. It'd be great if you could have a house which you just live in and it's worth $500,000 because it's just where you live, and you've got $500,000 sitting in Bitcoin that you can sell by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you know? So I think that there's massive pools of capital that eventually Bitcoin will just continue to eat away at.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, looking, it's sort of people who ought to understand it still struggle, though, to see that. It's sort of almost like in the shadow of the tsunami wave. You can't really see it coming. And I think, I mean, the reason I ask about sports and that, as you know, I'm looking at a lot of these other things that are happening, and, you know, I wonder, is there a move towards just having a bit more of a balanced life? where you can have an individual pursuit, a sport or an activity that you undertake alongside your work, alongside your family, all of these things. Because as you say, if you're working in the financial sector, it's quite intense, that takes over. And I just wonder whether we're seeing that now, where young people are sort of work, haven't got time to think about anything else, and you're too busy. You're so busy that you don't even do the thing you should do, which is look into Bitcoin, or you take a step back and look at the situation more clearly. And it's sort of, working yourself up into a bit of a frenzy. I don't know, I don't have a conclusion here, but sort of looking at the role of something like a meditative physical activity, like running long distance or swimming, for example. I mean, do you think those kinds of activities give you the clarity to sort of zoom out and see things?
Yeah, they do. I also, I do a bit of meditation as well. It just helps. I find, because you're on your phone, you're working, you're checking the stories, you're looking at the market, whatever. Your head's always racing with ideas. So, I find, it's only kind of 10 or 15 minutes a day, but it just that chance to just breathe and clear your head is a good way. I find like I'm in a better mood if I do that. I know if I go a few weeks without, I feel different. So, absolutely, we all need to find time in this busy world, but it feels like everyone's on the treadmill. It's harder and harder for people to get off at the moment.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's my observation, which I'm still trying to process into an analysis, because this is kind of happening real time. But as you know, I live in Kamakura, and I go into Tokyo, and it's like, it's the mega city, and you're riding the train, and everyone's sardined, and it's hot, and it's like, what are you all doing?
Yeah.
You're all going, into work, and it's a very righteous thing, and it almost feels exploitative in the sense that it's kind of in human nature to want to be industrious and be productive and do stuff. I believe, at least, and yet that is not rewarded. You're sort of just on the treadmill, and you sort of, one thing I noticed in Japan, and I think New Zealand's a bit better for this, but everyone who has the time to do sports or leisure activities are much older people. And in New Zealand, at least you can be in your 20s and I think have a hobby or go and do something, do mountain biking or whatever. But that's just not a thing for the whole cohort of young people in Japan right now. And it's like, if you don't have those things at that young age, and like yourself, going on this deep drive to run and do the triathlons and these proof of work activities, you almost lose something. You miss that critical phase. And I don't know, man, it's like, it's not a very nice place to be. I think it's almost like incomplete. And I mean, you talk about meditation, and that's also really important, but you can't do that when you're just strung out. And so I'm looking at it a lot more from that cultural side. Globally, we're just seeing people kind of checking out. And I don't know, man, sorry, again, no conclusions here, but it's sort of, it's just a really interesting time.
Yeah, it is. Going back to New Zealand, I know you feel a little bit kind of down on where we're going, when you come back here. But I, objectively, if you just look at things like, global surveys on best places in the world to live, New Zealand is usually in the top 10 countries globally. It's usually Scandinavia who takes it out, which, it makes sense. I've been there. It's amazing the way they live over there. But, we're very low on corruption, which I think is incredible. I do trust our politicians. I don't think they do a very good job, but I trust them. I don't think there's a lot of corruption here. The police, you can go up to the police and have a chat with them.
Yeah.
You can't do that in the States, So I think we're very lucky. The government generally runs a balanced budget. We don't have much debt as a country. There's lots of really good things about New Zealand. We just need to find a way to lift ourselves up a little bit.
Well, being a bit more optimistic, so I've got two things that I'm really interested in. So obviously I'm going to go down to Christchurch in a couple of days for the Kiwi, and we're going to do the panel talk about the future of Bitcoin in New Zealand, which I guess is a bit of a continuation of the dialogue that you and I and Paul had a little while back. But I think New Zealand has always had this historical role as a bit of a social experiment in terms of trying new stuff out. And again, the people are lovely. I do love Kiwis. Deep down, and we've got some systems, like even, for example, the way we run schools here with the board of trustees, that's a pretty unique system. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK or Australia, but certainly in Asia and many parts of the world, school is just a full-on, no contact, parents don't have any say kind of a thing. And I would actually like to explore this a bit more, because I think even though it's still a state school in the sense that it's, the curriculum is set from the top.
Yeah.
The parents can have a say, and that's like, man, that's like localism at its core. And that's just one example. But I think we've got a lot of these kind of building blocks in New Zealand that we take for granted. The amount of just land available to do stuff, etc. Like there's things like that. And then that culture of building, and you're a perfect example of this. You invented this thing, and I'd love to learn more. Later on, but over a drink or something about this bike rack that you invented. But that's a very common story that we've seen in New Zealand, and I think maybe. Well, I mean, what do you think? Is that something that's almost in our DNA that we can leverage to kind of meet this new Bitcoin future that's coming?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, also I've like you, I've travelled a bit. I lived in Japan, lived in the States, lived in the UK for a while, and I'm always interested when I'm overseas. I see these whole industries that exist that don't even exist in New Zealand because we just haven't thought of it yet. Yeah. And then sure enough, 5 or 10 years later, it starts to happen here, and we're just going to be slow at adopting. We always have been. Some nice little examples where we were kind of first with things like, I think the FPOS system. But again, that's because we have a very small banking system. There's only one clearinghouse. There's only like 10 banks, and they all clear in the same clearinghouse. The States has got 4,000 banks. They've got like 150 clearinghouses. So if you're with one bank, and the bank you want to pay is not part of the same clearinghouse, you can't even pay each other. You do like a wire transfer. So, because we have that, we were perfect for trying something like that. But in general, I always find, whether it's like, like I used to go to the driving range, golf and baseball when I was in Japan, just those kind of things. And then I said, why don't New Zealand's like a golfing country? Why don't we have those? Eventually, like 15 years after Japan kind of had that technology, it comes to New Zealand. So we'll get there with Bitcoin, but I find it frustrating that, whether it's the banks or, even Sharesies or KiwiSaver offers or, friends who still work in financial markets, just completely dismissive.
Yeah. I think that's probably the one thorn in this whole project is sort of I want to call it statism, but there's always, I find, a knee-jerk reaction, not one of curiosity or sort of questioning, but it's sort of like, oh no. And I've come up against this, and I mean, I think you and I have done well to broach these topics. We've done the workshop, and we've done a few different things like that, where we've tried to communicate what Bitcoin means. But you do kind of come up against sort of people's preconceptions about it, and I think that's the issue here. Because we've got the goods in terms of building. Because, New Zealand is like a DIY country. We've had to solve a lot of problems on our own. So there's like ingenuity and innovation sort of lives amongst us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess in conclusion, I am sort of bullish on that side of things, but it's sort of until people like are nodding their heads about Bitcoin, I don't feel like the innovation's going to pour into it from just everyday Kiwis who are like, we'll build this, because we've got a lot of software, a lot of tech.
It's a lot of tech. I mean, Wellington's a big tech centre. There's a lot of guys here. The business I've been in have always been product businesses. And every time we go to awards, whether it's the Wellington Gold Awards or the NZT Export Awards, actually, lucky enough, one year when I was running a garage project, the craft brewery, we were lucky enough to win the Deloitte Fast 50. And we had a 3-year growth rate of 664%.
Wow.
Which is staggering, right?
Yeah.
But normally some tech company wins it with like a 2.5 or 3,000% because, you build a piece of software and then scaling it super quick because but scaling a brewery is actually quite hard work. You need to buy more stainless steel and more hops and all that kind of thing. So anyway, but, the point is every time I go to these awards events, we tend to be one of the few product companies there. Whether it was phil&teds or Garage Project or Goodnature is another product company I've worked for. Wellington is very dominated by tech, and there are a lot of smart people here. A lot of really smart, software developers.
Some of the best developers I've ever known in my life, and I've worked in many different countries, are here in Wellington. And they're humble, they seek out truth. They're sort of not in an obtuse way, but they build solutions that are profound. And there's quite a few of these things that you wouldn't know if you didn't know the industry, but there's certain things that have come out of New Zealand and Wellington in particular that are world class. And so I'm just kind of looking forward tentatively to that future where a lot of this innovation, this kind of spirit to build things kind of pours in to Bitcoin in New Zealand. I think it will come.
Yeah, it will. And I guess I think, because I can't do too much to contribute, I feel, in New Zealand, because I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a developer, I'm not a programmer.
Well, you're a strategy guy.
Yeah, I guess so. And to a certain extent, I've tried to be a connector. There's people who either don't know each other or looking for connections. I was talking to some guys who are doing some Bitcoin mining and they want a connection with an electricity company, and I had that connection. And so I guess I try and do what I can there. But I think what can we do next in terms of making the story bigger in New Zealand and making more people aware, and who should we be talking to? Always difficult, I think, trying to talk to a politician, because no one wants to be the first, and no one wants to be the Bitcoin politician in New Zealand, although a number of them probably hold it. So I don't know. I'm interested in how I can perhaps, help more to spread the word. But
I got a closing thought for you. Bitcoin and sport was something we talked about a little while back. I mean, I was on the airplane with the Maori All Blacks back from Japan. What does it take for sports celebrities, sports heroes to be on the Bitcoin story? Because I think, we don't need to talk to the politicians. They don't. I mean, they're redundant, but that sort of proof of work of being an athlete, of trying your best on the field, doing what you do.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a way we can look.
There must be one, right? It's like, the first gay All Black. Like, it's statistically, there must have been hundreds over the years, but no one wanted to say there were. But there must be some sports people out there who have been orange pilled and are holding Bitcoin and would want to talk about it.
Yeah. So if there's anyone out there who's any New Zealand sporting heroes who are Bitcoiners, do reach out. And I think at the very least, I mean, even if they're not, we can have that conversation, because just like farmers, who I often talk about, farmers understand Bitcoin intuitively, because you can't print a cow, you can't quantitatively ease a lamb. You can't fake performance.
Yeah.
You either scored the try or you didn't. You either finished the marathon or you didn't. And the clock doesn't lie. And that sort of stuff, I think, feeds in here. And I wonder if there's more we can look at here around sports, and even stuff a bit more, looking at mountain climbing, endurance stuff, sailing. There's a whole lot of these kind of pursuits that are at their core proof of work, and they align so well with Bitcoin. And you can do that. You can hold a bit of Bitcoin, and it can actually fund your sporting career as well. So, I mean, I'm optimistic about that. Maybe I need to go and have a bit of a look and see if I can find some of these people.
Yeah. I don't know where you start looking, but they must be out there.
But hey, Jason, I do appreciate your time. If people want to connect with you and follow what you're doing, I mean, what's the best way for them to do that?
It sounds a bit old school, but probably LinkedIn's the easiest place to find me.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter, but I'm more of a watcher than a poster.
Yeah.
I read a lot.
Yeah.
But I think my handle is @mover&shaker, which is actually a handle from phil&teds days, but the account's still there.
Yeah. Sweet. Hey man, thanks for coming in, and it's great to catch up with you in person.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Cody.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Codyellingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.